Good afternoon, and welcome to IAB There, our regular streaming show in which we connect the digital advertising ecosystem. My name is Angelina Eng, and I am the VP of Measurement and Attribution with IAB's Programmatic and Data Center. On today's show, I'm really excited to have our special guest, Joey Trotz, Global Head of Technology at Watson Advertising and The Weather Company. He's a recognized industry leader and a collaborative consensus builder. I can definitely assure you of that. He's an innovator and expert in this digital field. And for 20 years, he has identified and implemented some really critical technologies supporting hundreds of millions of dollars in marketing budgets across programmatic, video, audience, display, and mobile. I'm also proud to have him represent IBM Watson as one of our board members of the Programmatic and Data Center. Today, we are going to be talking about some of the things we heard in Audience Connect a few weeks ago at one of our events. Welcome, Joey. How are you?
Hey, good to see you, Angie.
Hey, so thank you, Juan. You were actually on a panel at Audience Connect, so thank you again for being a participant. Always great to have you join and provide your expertise and your opinions on everything.
I always have one of those, maybe two.
Maybe two. So you, I think I met you maybe 10, 15 years ago when we were on the ad ops committee together. We covered things like brand safety, ad verification, video, all the things that are still very hot topics today. Now we're seeing, the industry evolving with more privacy-centric solutions. And I'd love your take on some of, what is your perspective in terms of what's happening in the space, especially with cookies going away and mobile identifiers that Apple has been rolling out.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, look, I think this is a logical progression, and I really, while it's difficult, I really appreciate what's happening across the market, right? We've not paid the attention that we need to making sure the consumers that drive our businesses understand how they're compensating us to actually deliver the content that they know and love. So, what we see happening is to some degree a reckoning that's a long time coming. And, it's going to give us a way to really rebuild a lot of the underlying infrastructure in a way that makes this business a lot healthier, I think, in the future. And there are ways that we will still be as effective as we have been.
Now, in the event, there was a lot of talk about the consumer value and building consumer trust. How do you see, or how has IBM and Weather been approaching consumer privacy and trust?
We've really tried to be at the forefront of privacy, right? It's a value proposition that we've had to build with our users. We're the most trusted brand in weather, right? We were recently voted by an independent survey to be the most accurate weather forecaster, I think, in the world. And with that kind of trust comes a lot of responsibility. The users who visit weather.com and our apps, they're relying on us for, in some cases, life-saving information. And they have to share their location with us, right? If they really want to know exactly what's happening close by, they're sharing their precise location. And that implies a level of trust with us as a brand, and we take that very seriously. So we've really tried to be at the forefront on the weather side of understanding that location is so critical and so personal. But then on the other side, right, we're Watson Advertising, where we're trying to lead the way with AI and machine learning techniques that can drive outcomes that publishers and marketers want without having access to some of those really sensitive details.
So you've worked on the publisher side for a really long time. You've been at some really great and fascinating large organizations. What are some things that you would, what are some things that publishers aren't doing today that you think they should be as it relates to consumer privacy and trust?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot about my old friends back at CNN.com, and I know they're doing amazing work over there. And I think about them in the context of, and there's a lot of publishers like them who have a very broad, very diverse, very deep set of text content, right? Which, as we move into this, post third-party cookie world, becomes an absolute treasure trove for publishers, right? So I think about publishers like Business Insider or News Corp, or I mean, there are too many to enumerate. But the key there is we need to be sure that we're digging deep into understanding how we will, as publishers, communicate those publisher-defined attributes to the buying community, because they're going to have much less insight here, towards the end of 2023.
And, I know that some of the challenges when it comes to first party data, especially PII data, not a lot of publishers have a significant large first party database, right? With names, addresses, and so forth. And now we're seeing all these ID solutions come to play. A lot of advertisers really interested in targeting. In fact, when I worked at Merkle, you and I talked about this, right? At Merkle, our differentiator was that we had a lot of first-party data that we can help our clients match their audiences. Do you see more publishers, or what are some of the challenges that publishers have when it comes to first-party registration and data?
Well, the identity space is absolutely overflowing, right? There are so many solutions out there that even the most sophisticated publishers, I'm sure, are having a hard time keeping up with the newest, the latest approach, vendor offering. What's clear there, at least to me, I believe that there's going to be a patchwork of identity solutions that we have to live within, right? A given agency is going to have their favored vendor in that space, but another agency is going to have a different one, and another direct marketer is going to have a different one. And so I think publishers need to get up to speed on those players and what they offer and what it will take to integrate them. But I think we also need to just be prepared for multiple partners in this space. It's not going to be a one and done to solve for this. Yeah.
And what is the consumer value exchange, right? Is it a registration? Do you see more paywalls going up? Do you see more content behind some sort of registration wall, subscription based? It seems like there's a lot of again, emphasis on first party data, and so with that comes a lot of you'll need people to sign in or to identify them to actually be able to do that, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's value propositions of all kinds, and that's going to vary from publisher to publisher, right? At Weather, we have a lot of content that is very specific to the user, right? We alert when we tell you when a lightning strike happens within X number of miles from your current location. Today, that doesn't require a login. Might it in the future? It could. No announcements here on that front. But I will say that, subscriptions have been a part of the puzzle, right? Have been part of the revenue model for tons of publishers for a long time, right? Where certain content or certain access is gated. I think that will continue. Will it accelerate? I think that depends on how we see the ad market develop, and if we see a contraction there, right? I don't see a direct line of sight between increased registration requirements and paywalls and that sort of thing. But I think it's what I'd like to emphasize is I think it gets down to the publisher. What's the unique value proposition that a given publisher has to their visitors, and creating an authentic conversation with those users that makes sense, right? It doesn't make sense for a given site to ask for location if that has nothing to do with their offering, but it does for us. So I think it's a case by case basis, but I think there will be pressure on all forms of revenue as we see the landscape change.
Now, there was a lot of conversation. In fact, just listening to IAB Tech Lab Renaissance event that is just about to end or has ended, and lots of conversations around cross-media measurement, multi-platform measurement, multi-channel measurement, and how complicated it's going to get. What are some concerns that you have from from the publisher's perspective, right, and from the ad tech perspective, when it comes to clients and advertisers not having a real attributable reporting platform?
Right. I think we see signs of this in some of the activity at Facebook, right, where they've noted that their conversion metrics are down significantly since the loss of the launch of the app tracking transparency framework from Apple, right? That's sort of the tip, I think, of the iceberg. What we're going to see is really, I think, a shift in balance between third parties being sort of the referee and telling us as publishers and on the other side, marketers, how a given piece of media performed. Those sorts of signals are going to be much, much scarcer and are increasingly going to be fed into models that are not a census measurement, but a sampling, right? Because by their very nature, they're not going to see every transaction as privacy becomes more of an attribute of every one of those impressions. So I think, from where I sit over in Watson Advertising, right, we're leveraging our machine learning and our AI capabilities to build those models, right, to understand and attribute, cross-media measurement. This is not entirely new, right? If you go back and look at media 25 years ago, there was no clear way to track between print and television, right? So it was all modeled. I think we will see more of that. But, I think we're in a better place than we were back then. But it is to some degree a return to some of those challenges of not having direct measurable understanding of every minuscule transaction.
And so there were conversations around and moving into data clean rooms, right? Which, from my understanding, I haven't actually implemented any clean rooms recently, but it is around the advertiser pushing in their first party data, publishers also pushing in their first party data. How comfortable are publishers with data clean rooms?
Yeah, I think it's going to vary, but I think, we as IBM understand kind of the value that's presented by the concept of the data clean room, right? Core to the clean room concept is differential privacy, right? Mathematical methods of making sure that the data that we don't want to leave that clean room simply cannot leave that clean room. Right. And so you see early versions of that in like the I'm going to forget the name of it. Yeah. Yeah.
We can come back to that one. No problems.
Okay.
I know.
Right.
No pressure. But
no,
one of the large providers.
Yes. One of the large providers has had kind of a thing like this of their own. What I see this as now is that clean rooms give us a way to, in a privacy compliant way, still use the most granular data that a publisher and an advertiser or marketer have at hand without giving up the privacy of those users, or even just in terms of data leakage, right? A lot of publishers have data that's very, very close to them that they wouldn't want their competitors to see, the same way that a marketer doesn't want their competitors to see it. And this way, both entities are protected. It's almost, the term I've used a lot is it's a private onboarding environment, right? Historically, onboarding has relied on a couple of major vendors. where everybody ships their data to, they normalize it, and they let everybody consume it. But the match rates there have always been challenging, and the control has never been super clear. So I do see the clean room as an important tool that represents kind of, it represents part of the concepts of privacy sandbox that Google is working on, right? It represents some of the promise of the identity space, right? Where I don't want to share my IDs perhaps with another party, but I'm happy to report out on the matches or the types of audiences that matched a given set of IDs. So like there's a lot of potential there, and I think it's an area that the whole industry is going to have to understand more in the coming months.
Now, at IBM and at Weather, I mentioned it earlier, where you're not using a lot of PII data. What is your approach to, how are you navigating and solving for the post-cookie world?
Yeah, I mean, every publisher has PII. Do they have name, address, and phone number? Not as many, right? So I wouldn't say that we don't use PII. We use it. It's consented. We're very careful about those uses. And again, we have a lot of trust between our users have a lot of trust in what we do for them, and we explain it as clearly as possible. But what I see is the personal data that we have and the personal data that we may be collecting in the future, that any publisher is going to be collecting, the demands on tracking the provenance of that data, right, and being able to efficiently respond to a data subject rights request, right? I'm a user, I want my data, I want it scrubbed from your systems. Being able to do that effectively at scale, we're just scratching the surface of that today, right? So one of the things that we've been doing as the third-party cookies going away, as ATT came along with iOS, we've really been bolstering all those back-end systems, right? The CDP that sits behind the scenes that lets us manage this data. We've really been building that up. Clean rooms are a part of that puzzle. Because the tools that have been in place historically just are not sufficient to do that, right? Everyone, 10 years ago, everyone's table stakes was a DMP, right? Well, now those table stakes have shifted significantly to the successor, essentially the CDP, which is the DMP on steroids and holding personal information. That's a migration and an evolution that is being heavily driven by what's going on in the market, and we're very focused on that.
Now, Pierre Dennett from Lotame had done this whole chart whiteboarding of all the different ways that the programmatic ecosystem could work using their Lotame solution. You have been in pretty much almost every conversation I've been at when I was running ad ops at Dentsu and at Merkle on programmatic. How are you, how is programmatic going to change in the next few years? Is it, do you see us being able to scale and target broadly as we do today?
Yeah, I think there's definitely going to be an evolution, like I said before. Programmatic historically has relied on what the buyer thought about a particular ID, right? What was the value of that impression right now compared to other impressions that they're seeing? What's the likelihood of that user, that ID to convert or to take the action desired? That's going to change because that visibility is not going to be clear as we lose that third-party cookie. So what becomes the medium, right? What do we transact against, right? And I think it's going to go back to the data, right? So seller-defined audiences, something that the Tech Lab is working on, right? As an aspect of the pre-bid architecture, things like that are going to be key. The same way that today, or historically, we've relied on data brokers to tell us this is an in-market auto intender. We're going to have to shift to seller telling the market that that's what they're seeing. The algorithms are going to need to adjust to determine whether that's actually accurate, right? So the same way they evaluate the value of an impression today, I think we're going to see a trend towards evaluating the efficacy of how a publisher describes their audience. So that kind of goes back to, we've got to get better at this stuff. We've got to get much more sophisticated about how we describe our audiences as publishers, because historically we've frankly relied on the data broker to do most of that, because that was the way to buy at scale. So it could be a rocky road, but I do think that some of these techniques we've talked about with differential privacy, with AI, with modeling, those are all going to contribute to sort of a new landscape for how digital advertising is bought and sold.
So do you see a shift away from open RTB and into private marketplaces and automated guaranteed?
We're seeing that shift already, right? We're definitely seeing more move that way, because frankly, we're seeing more and more folks understand the value of using the programmatic pipe, but for guaranteed inventory, right? There's certain audience, there's a certain data point that this client really wants to get, and so they want to reserve it, and so we do that through some of those channels. But I think there's the potential for a richer and more effective open marketplace, right? If these seller-defined audiences are passed in the open, right, on the open market in pre-bid, and the algorithms get to the place where they can effectively determine whether the auto intender delivered by publisher A is better performing than the one delivered by publisher B, right? That makes the open market even more valuable, because in theory, the publisher knows a lot more about that consumer's intent because of their longstanding relationship with them, the trust issue. Maybe they're registered, maybe they're logged in. You know, the gateway, I think, to the best intel is going to shift, and I think the publisher is going to help drive that.
Now we also at the event talked about CTV, and you've been, very involved in a lot of the video standards that we have today. Where do you see CTV fitting in terms of obviously there's a massive growth, lots of spend moving towards that. What's your perspective in terms of where how CTV is going to be evolving?
Yeah, I mean, I think CTV presents a bundle of challenges that the market is now addressing, right? The stitched in advertising, the challenges of pods, the challenges of environments where not only are there no cookies, there are often no identifiers at all, right? So we've seen, not such great behaviors in some places with some fraud problems because, well, fraud follows the money and the CPMs are highest in CTV. I think CTV is well positioned to be in a favorable place as the identity landscape changes, because they have not been bought on an identity basis largely up to now, right? So their transition to being more contextual based or registration and actually known, authenticated users, it's probably a more natural transition there, right? So it's going to be key. It's where a huge amount of digital attention is spent today. That's only going to be getting larger.
And let's talk about privacy a little bit in terms of, not to get into a legal discussion because I'm not a legal expert.
Nor am
I. Are you sure? You can't tell based on how you negotiate contracts. So, where do you see? What are some things that you're worried about in terms of where regulation's going, especially from an international and national perspective?
Yeah, I mean, the challenge with privacy today is the fragmentation, right? And the continuous reinterpretation of what legislation or guidelines actually mean, right? They're interpreted in so many different ways. So privacy, I'm most worried about the fragmentation issue, right? We've had a challenging law in Europe with GDPR, but at least it's applicable across a large geographic region with some minor differences from in certain territories. The U.S. has been much harder, right? We've got a very aggressive law out of California, the new version coming up here soon. We've had activity in a ton of other state legislatures. I think ultimately, I'm worried about that continued fragmentation, but I'm optimistic that we'll see some of these things come together, perhaps if our legislature can shift attention to it, and it might come out of some of the recent, firestorms that we've seen on the Hill. Because ultimately, I think, and this is going to be me speaking, not so much IBM. I think it could be beneficial to the industry if there was a single standard across the U.S.
Totally agree with you.
Right. I think, I'm not exactly sure what IBM stance is, so that's why I'm saying that. I think the IAB has been very vocal about the challenges we have until that happens. So what I see is really critical, and I mentioned this word earlier, and I love to use it in this context. You normally use it when talking about fine wine, but provenance, right? Being able to, from the moment a grape is picked, right, or in this case, a piece of data is captured, we understand the permissions that were associated with it and how they related to legislation and policy at that moment. And that little packet of data follows that data point or that grape all through its life, through a publisher systems, an ad tech vendor systems, a marketer system, so that in the end, when we need to apply rules against how that data is consumed, we have that provenance available to us. We're not there yet. We're far from that. But I do see tools coming along that are going to help us down that path.
That's great. Well, unfortunately, we are at time. I love talking to you. I mean, I miss the days when we're just in a room and we're all powwowing and sitting down and really getting into the nitty gritty and talking about what's going on in the industry. Hopefully soon.
Hopefully soon. Hopefully soon.
Thank you,
All right.
Joey.
Well, thank you so much, Angie.
Thank you. And thank you, everyone, for listening in and watching. I'll see you later. I'm Angelina Eng, VP of Measurement and Attribution here at the IAB.